Hi, everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not for profit charitable trust called Common Knowledge. And our trust holds the concept that hundreds of fathers and mothers developed around childbirth in the early 1970s, which is in the description, and also the skills that they developed in order to be able to work through the activity of birthing their baby. I gave birth first in 1970, and the phrase natural birth was just beginning to be used in the United States. Our trust is in New Zealand, and that word started to be used in the 50s in the United States, in the 60s, because of three obstetricians, Grantley Dick Reed in New Zealand, Lamaze and Bradley method, who who developed the first ever childbirth preparation classes. And in the United States in the 60s and the 70s, there was a very high societal expectation that all of us attend these classes and learn skills because there were no choices. We were in the evidence based practice of the day, which was follow your doctor's orders. And most of us went to the hospital to give birth. Yes, the United States was a bit unique because every state had outlawed midwifery, whereas if you gave birth in the Commonwealth countries, there were always midwives involved, both doing home births and hospital births. And so the word natural birth began to sort of float up into the collective consciousness in the 1970s. And people sort of understood what it meant. So let me go back in my lifetime to the fact that in 1970, when I gave birth, there was a 4.5% cesarean rate. Cesareans were major abdominal surgery. The maternity system was not as sophisticated as it is now, and cesareans were basically done to save our lives, which meant 95% of us labored. And so, in the collective mentality, we would all go, see, 95% of us can have a natural birth. So, what that meant was that some of us labored for hours, others of us labored for days, some of us coped well, others of us suffered, which meant we didn't cope well. Either the skills we had didn't work for us or we didn't have any skills. Like throughout time, women have lacked skills. And so suffering in childbirth was a common phenomena, totally independent of risks or problems or tragedies. We suffered because we didn't cope with the natural occurring pain of labor contractions. It hurts, and we have no control over it. We don't know when it's going to stop. So, when 95% of us labored, when I gave birth in 1970, some of us had good outcomes. Some of us were healthy. Being healthy didn't necessarily provide a good outcome. Having risks didn't necessarily provide a poor outcome. Some of us had tragedies. Thankfully, very few of us had tragedies. And there are lots of tragedies involved in childbirth that's laboring, that ends up with a vaginal birth, because many of us as women bring health issues into our pregnancy, always have. They may be different ones now, and babies develop health issues when we're pregnant. We develop other ones. And there are issues that occur that are unique to birth for both the baby and the mother. So the concept of natural birth that began to rise up when I first gave birth in 1970 really was focused on low-risk women, assuming that a low-risk woman would have a low-risk birth. That's not necessarily accurate. A woman who is low risk, her baby may have a problem, or without her knowledge and without skills, she may be one of those women who labor for days and days and days. There may be other issues that come up that weren't observed before. In other words, a perfectly healthy woman can be Rh negative, and that could be incompatible with her baby, and her baby could be at risk for having a problem with its blood because Rh negative ROGAM didn't develop until the 80s. And so, really, the only solution was to give babies blood transfusions, which were at risk then because they weren't able to really determine blood compatibility as well as they are now. So, something changed between 1970 and my last birth in 1982. And that was the rise of the global natural birth movement. And they were very clearly anti-medical then, and by and large, to some degree now, but the conversations women have are different. So our trust is in New Zealand that in 1990 put in place an absolutely wonderful midwifery model of care, where 98% of all women have free maternity care. They have their own care provider in pregnancy and in birth and after birth, and they have a partnership, and they have a logo behind the maternity system, which is the midwifery model, which is that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care. Yet they serve 98% of the women, so you already know that's a bit of a conundrum. You also know, even though you're not aware of it, that when a profession believes that what somebody's experience is basically normal and natural, part of life event, that it's basically just normal and natural. It's a no-brainer. So then why did midwives go to school for 4 years? That's an oxymoron. Or why do they give women 24/7 care? That's an oxymoron. And if they're going to school for 4 years in a partnership, and they're building a partnership model based on women can choose the birth they want, and the women then have an expectation that the midwife provide them with the birth they want, you have a problem. And we have a problem within this wonderful system. And we have a problem that exhibits itself in statistics, so that more midwives are tired. They don't see midwifery as a lifelong profession. And the cesarean rate has gone from 12.9% to almost 30% under midwifery care. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that in the early 2000s, a midwife researched midwifery notes. So these are notes that midwives are taking about their clients and about the births. And what this researcher discovered was that the word natural birth occurred in thousands of women's notes as long as the woman had a vaginal birth, totally independent of everything else. She could be induced, she could have her membranes ruptured, she could be augmented, she could have lots of other types of medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures. She could have an episiotomy, forceps, ventouse. All of those could occur in a birth as long as the baby was born vaginally. Now, the researchers discovered that the word natural birth was being applied to anything that wasn't a cesarean. And then the midwifery profession in New Zealand went through a reassessment phase and said, that's not what we mean by natural birth. And this is one of the things that, as I taught the strengthening the partnership workshops, that midwives actually came to believe that a natural birth meant the avoidance of all interventions. The word intervention wasn't used until the 80s. When I gave birth, there were assessments, monitoring, and procedures. So after that research was done, the midwifery profession said, no, in order to truly have a natural birth, women have to avoid these interventions. And it turned out to be a list of 30 different things. And you yourself can just make a list of interventions. If you come up with 5 of them, that means each woman who wants or hopes for or chooses a natural birth must avoid those 5. If you come up with more than 5, she has to avoid more things in order to achieve that. The list that the midwives in the workshops um, compiled was 30, and I put it up on this screen, but this screen, which is eCam, which is a wonderful live platform, has recently updated and my overlays are gone, so I can't put it up. So midwives chose a lot of things, ruptured membranes, inductions, pain relief, having to stay in bed, being told what to do, not having a spontaneous onset of labor. It went on and on and on, which meant that we as women are saying to each other, in order to achieve this thing called a natural birth, you have to avoid all of these things. So as women, then we make it too hard for each other to achieve that. When we make it too hard for each of us to achieve a clearly defined goal, which is this goal to have a natural birth, and there are so many hurdles that we have to run around or run over or run past or run by or jump over, and we don't achieve that, then this is the reason that we have this absolutely meteoric rise in shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, frustration, anger, and birth trauma of women who wanted a natural birth, who even planned for a natural birth, who wrote a birth plan, who researched the pros and cons of every medical assessment, every intervention, and chose mentally to avoid or not have those, and then ran into reality. Part of that reality is the evidence-based practice of the day, the standards of care, the guidelines to practice that exist for every birth professional and every institution where birth occurs. We are not ever going to have in modern societies institutions that believe that women, when they go into labor, should just be left alone to discover birth by themselves, and there should be no assessments, no monitoring, no procedures, because birth is just a normal part of life that rarely requires medical care, and so just let women do it. We're just never going to do that again. And if you want to do that, you have an option in most countries. Never go to a doctor, never go to a midwife, and just have your baby at home, just like women around the world are doing now. They are all having that natural birth, whether they labor for hours or days, whether they cope well or suffer, whether they have a good outcome or not, whether they have risks, whether those risks become problems or not, whether those problems can become tragedies. So right around the world now, where there is no medical care, all women are having that natural birth. And that natural birth includes anything or everything that might happen at birth, known or unknown. We globally have always been faced with sort of two truths with a big T. There is no way to know what your birth's going to be like. You're never going to know. Even if you plan to be induced, even if you plan a cesarean, you do not know how that birth is going to unfold. Babies don't come to plan. They do now if we choose to be induced or if we have a non-laboring cesarean. We have to plan for the day we're going to do that. But babies don't really come to plan. We're trying to more and more plan everything. And the natural birth movement would like you to believe that it's the medical profession that's imposing all of these things on women. And sometimes it looks like that. If I'm a woman who wants a VBAC or a vaginal birth after cesarean, and I go to a doctor who says to me, you can't have one, that really feels as though the doctor is imposing that on us. And in a sense, on an individual basis, they are imposing that on us, right or wrong, good or bad. But the imposition that the medical profession has actually comes in response to what I saw happen between the 70s and the 80s, which was our demands as consumers to reduce the risks that were associated with the natural birthing 95% of us were doing. And we were doing that because it was considered natural and normal that risks occur. Because without surgical birth, that's true. Right? When you remove medical care, it is natural and normal for there to be risks involved, known or unknown. Most of those risks, a lot of risks, many fewer problems. Number of problems, infinitely fewer tragedies. So we have a pyramid that's kind of like that. Lots of risks at the bottom, fewer problems, infinitely fewer tragedies. So when we all were giving birth vaginally, we had a risk because we had a breech baby. Right? We might have had a problem in that breech birth. The head might have been delayed or the cord might have come down. But at the end of the day, the baby came out and neither the cord or the engaged head was a problem or it became a tragedy. And so that risk of having a breech birth seemed to be having a problem, and that problem resolved itself and didn't leave a tragedy. However, us as consumers didn't want that risk to have a potential problem, to have a potential tragedy. So between the 70s and the 80s, consumers started to demand of the medical profession that they decrease the potential risks. That's why RhoGAM for Rh negative was developed. Medical profession could have said, tough, you got incompatible blood with your baby. That's just the way it goes. Right? They could have said, the tragedies associated to twins or breech babies are so minimal that we just accept it as part of it. You have infinitely less tragedy with a breech birth than you do getting in a car or having your kid swallow something at home or dying of a heart attack or having cancer or anything. Yet, my generation were modernizing very rapidly after the Second World War. And we had an entitled expectation that we would not have as many risks. It came along with a lot of other things in life as well. It was okay to drink and drive. We didn't have seat belts. We didn't have child seats. We didn't have speed limits. But consumers, another thing, we threw trash out the window of the moving cars, right? So we consumers started to require of our societies that the risks be reduced. And that occurred tremendously in childbirth. It also coincided with our ability to have effective birth control. We wanted to limit the number of children we had so that each child was more valued. So we didn't want to lose a child. And that occurred at the same time with the rise of immunizations, the multiple immunizations. I grew up during the polio period. Our parents were terrified that we would get polio. And I grew up when we had measles parties and chickenpox parties. I don't know whether vaccines are right or wrong. I don't know whether cesareans are right or wrong. That's not my job as the director of Common Knowledge Trust. My job is to promote a concept that families, fathers, and mothers developed, and to some degree to promote our online birthing classes of skills fathers and mothers developed. Because even back then in the early 70s, when this discussion about natural birth occurred, it always set itself up as an oppositional to the medical profession. It became natural birth versus medical birth, just as it became home birth versus hospital birth, or obstetricians versus midwives. This was totally unnecessary back then. It's totally unnecessary now, because underneath all of that is another truth. 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or the other. Every pregnant woman has to do the activity of birthing her baby by herself, no matter where that birth occurs, no matter who is present, no matter her circumstances or her beliefs, no matter her choices, lack of choices, change of choices, or what happens to or around her birth. We, women, are the only ones doing the activity of birthing our baby. If we get in a car to go to the hospital, it takes time. That's our activity. That's our labor. When we're prepped, that's our transition. When we're lying numb down from the boobs down, that is our delivery. This is an activity we are doing. Whether our labor starts spontaneously or whether we're induced, this is the activity we're doing. Whether we like it or not, or whether we hate it, whether people are nice to us or bitches, that's the activity we're doing. We're the only ones doing the activity. So in the 70s, when fathers and mothers developed the concept behind that we hold in our Common Knowledge Trust, the concept was simple, that when you're pregnant, it is normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills to do the activity of birthing your baby in all circumstances. Because here's another truth. We get pregnant to have a baby. None of us get pregnant to have a type of birth. We get pregnant to have a baby. And here's another truth. The birth of our baby is important to us, which means we have to focus on our birth. And if we focus exclusively on choices of what we expect them to give us or not do to us, then we miss the 100% of what we have to do, which is that we have to do the activity of birthing our baby, no matter what they are doing to or around us. And this is the failure of the natural birth movement and the failure of the ideas that were behind the natural birth movement, which was an anti-medical movement, which then put women in conflict with each other. And it caused women to do their gnarly, which was, I had a natural birth, you had a hospital birth. This is what women do to each other, right? They slight each other. And we have to change this. And this is what our trust has been dedicated to for 50 years, because fathers and mothers back in the 70s said, our birth is important to us. It's an activity we have to do. We want to learn skills to do that activity, no matter how that activity unfolds. And so we, as mothers and fathers, developed this concept that when you're pregnant, it is natural and normal to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills. And then it's natural and normal to apply those skills to the activity that we as women do to birth our baby. That keeps us engaged. That keeps us involved. That keeps us doing the activity, even if there is total chaos around us, like if we were in war in Syria, like if we were in poverty in Africa, like if we were in a hospital with somebody doing a rough internal on us. We are doing that activity, and when we bring skills into that activity, we birth better in all circumstances. And you know what we think when we're birthing better using skills? We're doing it naturally. And even when we're lying on the table having surgery, we know that we are engaged in the activity of bringing our baby from out of our body into our arms. That's got to be good. So we want you to pass on that concept. That concept is vitally important to our society, particularly with COVID, because in the 80s, fathers were told no longer to coach, no longer to have skills to help their partner when they birth. They were told just support her choices. So fathers were removed from their vital role of being equal participants in the birth of their children. And so then the doula profession developed. They developed as the birth coaches. That was unnecessary. In fact, and I'll make my statement here right now, you know where you should be as doulas, even though you may love to be at births and want to be at people's births and love babies, do it postnatally. That's where women need help. That's where men need help. That's where families need help. If you want to help, it isn't at the birth. Fathers need to become the coaches. It needs to be normal and natural self-learned skills when you're pregnant, and use those skills. That's what a family does. But they need help as a family after the birth. They need you to shop and to cook and to clean and take care of the other kids, so that if the men are going back to work, they don't have to do that when they come home. And the women who are taking care of a newborn can take time to get to know them. That's why in so many traditional cultures, women were secluded for the first 6 or 7 weeks until the baby actively smiled. So this is my statement as the director of a not-for-profit trust. Doulas need to become postnatal support people rather than birth support people. And in COVID, fewer doulas are being permitted in. It's the fathers. And if the fathers have been told, you're not a coach, you shouldn't be working with a woman with skills, then they don't know what to do. And if women have been told for the past 40 years, cows and cats aren't taught to birth and women don't need to be taught to birth, you just need to make a birth plan, then women are going into birth during COVID without skills, without a skilled partner, and with scared medical staff. How's that working for us? Birth in the time of COVID. So if you want to wake up in this childbirth conversation, you get to write down this concept that when you're pregnant, it is normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills and use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby in all circumstances. Write that down, pin it on your forehead, put it on a t-shirt, and tell everybody. If you're a birth professional listening to this, you have a responsibility. And this is how our trust works with you. It is very simple to say to every single one of your pregnant clients, look, we want to respect your choices. Make a birth plan. That's great. We're going to put all those things in your notes along with your lab tests. But it's an activity you're going to do with your baby. So here's a handout of skills-based methods. Pick and choose one or more of them. And then from 24 weeks, we're going to just put in your notes what skills you've learned. Every month, 24 weeks, 28 weeks, 32 weeks. Then when we change to every 2 weeks and every week, we're going to fill your notes with your lab results, anything we need to know to safeguard the health and well-being. We're going to fill it with your choices, and we're going to fill it with your skills. And during the birth of your baby, if we see anybody who's around you sees you cope and manage and work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, feel in control, and you and your partner working well together, we're going to praise you, because we love seeing skilled families. We love seeing skilled families. We really encourage you to become skilled because it makes our job easier. You'll enjoy your birth more. We love working with skilled families. If we need to negotiate something about your plan, keep using your skills. If you look like you're overwhelmed or your partner's not engaged, we can refer back to your notes and we can encourage you to use those skills. Do you see how easy it is as a care provider to grow a skilled birthing population? You see more people. So you can grow a skilled birthing population for your practice easily within a year. And the changes you will see when you are working with skilled families is off the charts positive. You will negotiate better with families. The women you see will be coping better. The fathers or others who are there will be more engaged. You will work together more as a team, as partners. This is what we need in this particular field of pregnancy and childbirth. As a birth professional, you are important. If you're a doula, the same thing. If you're a midwife, the same thing. Us, as families approaching our birth, we have to pass on the message to our friends and families that when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural, self-learned birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills to do the activity of birthing your baby, no matter what, no matter the circumstances, because we get pregnant to have a baby, not a particular type of birth. And when we're doing that activity, we can't get out of that activity. That's the natural part of it. It has to complete in a birth, one way or another. So, what are the things that we can do to change the childbirth conversation? Pass on this concept without a doubt. Stop using oppositional tones of voice. Stop using oppositional phrases. We have to stop using things like natural versus medical. For me, my birth is important to me. I don't really care how you have a baby, because you don't really care how I had mine, right? You've never asked me. That's not a conversation when you meet a stranger. Hi, what was your birth like? You didn't ask them what they eat or whether they exercise or whether they're stay-at-home moms or work. You don't ask people these things. They are not on the top of a societal agenda, but they are pervasive in our society's messaging to each other, even down to the point of how we as women talk about our own children. I can't tell you in 50 years how many women I have heard say this, and I still hear them say that. He was my cesarean. She was my home birth. We have to stop this. We can, because we change how we think. We now know that we have to think that it's normal and natural to self-learn skills when we're pregnant, rather than think, I'm pregnant now, I have to choose what kind of birth I want. Those are two different thinkings. We have to change the words. We have to say, if we're thinking it's normal and natural to learn skills, we have to be saying that. Those are the words. Therefore, self-learn birth skills. You can have people who teach classes, you still have to self-learn them. Just as you have a driving instructor sit with you, but you have to self-learn the skills. Just as you can have a birth coach with you, but you have to do the activity and apply the skills. But if we have words around, we need to make choices and make a birth plan and have an expectation that they give us the birth we want, then our behaviors are different, our actions are different. And that has been what I have seen in 50 years. The actions my generation took in the 70s, 60s, and 70s was that we learned birth skills and then applied those beginning skills as best as we could when we gave birth. We couldn't then do it in a cesarean because we were given a general anesthetic. We demanded to be awake. The medical profession responded with spinals and epidurals. We demanded our partner be with us at a cesarean. So they came in. Consumers demanded that breech births, twin births, didn't risk a vaginal birth. So we demanded when cesareans became easier that more of our babies were delivered by cesareans. And we demanded a change in cesareans because we were wearing bikinis and we didn't want to be left with an ugly scar. So the medical profession came up with a bikini cut so we wouldn't see it. And they became safer because we were demanding VBACs or vaginal births after cesareans. So the medical profession has responded to us. And when you go into Facebook groups now, the word natural birth really does include anything other than a cesarean. But as women, we are still diminishing one another because why should we diminish our baby's birth? We shouldn't. Okay, so we'd love you to purchase one of our online birthing classes. It's unique because mothers and fathers develop the skills for all births. But in that handout, pick any skills-based method and tell your birth professional from 24 weeks each time you have an appointment what skill you're learning. And then use those skills and ask them to praise you. And if you don't look like you're using skills, ask them to remind you to. Because this is a one-off activity you're going to do. You can't replay it the next day. The memories of that one-off activity are going to last a lifetime. Would you rather be pissed off at what they did or didn't do to you rather than proud of yourself because in a challenging birth you used your breathing and relaxation skills, if nothing more than that? Which would you prefer? Which feels more right? We're the advocates for use your skills because in Common Knowledge Trust, we hold tens and thousands of birth stories of families who used skills to birth their babies, from the easiest births to the most tragic ones. Every birth was enhanced because we were engaged in a skillful manner. We teach our children to become skilled, and yet societally, we have no expectation that any of us become skilled to birth our babies. And we believe and know this absolutely must change. Our trust can stimulate the conversation, but for 50 years we have not been effective because the natural birth movement has shouted us down. Think on that. So now's the time to elevate the concept. It's natural and normal when you're pregnant to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills. And it's absolutely essential that you use skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby the best you can, because that's really what parents do. They actively parent. And if you think that after the birth is when your parenting starts, your baby's with you now. You're parenting now. So do that skillfully. Matters. See you later. Bye-bye.